Now, while the restaurant industry embarks on protests today to highlight difficulties in the sector, research shows the economy is likely to remain depressed for a while. Research Institute Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies has been tracking the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic and has found that high-income consumers continue to stay home over fears of contracting the virus. Now, this means they are staying away from restaurants, malls and other services. And of course, this results in lower demand and a slower economic recovery. Executive Director at Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, Saul Levin, joins us now to unpack the economic recovery and how it's likely to play out in various sectors. Saul, good morning. Thanks so much for your time this morning. You know, we've just had a discussion with the restaurant industry, and I think it's fair to say that it's a difficult time for so many businesses around the country. But as your research shows, even if government does allow a wide-ranging opening of the economy, it's consumers themselves that will be making the choice to stay at home over fears of the virus.
Yes, I think what we have to realize is that as the contagion spreads and as the virus gets worse, and you've just shown the figures, people are going to stay at home because they're at risk. That means they're not going to restaurants, even if the restaurants are open or are selling alcohol, which means the 370,000 people who are employed in those industries are now under threat. So we know that it's a large industry. We know that it's an industry that has been struggling since the lockdown. But we also know that restaurants are overseas being seen as super spreader places. So people don't want to go into confined spaces. They're reading the news. They see what's happened globally and how the virus has been spread. So they are staying at home and then they're not taking the chance. And it's generally the high income consumers who have the ability to stay at home and who, are shopping elsewhere so that they don't take the risks that they would face in a restaurant.
It's such a difficult balancing act, isn't it, Saul, to try and reopen the economy, to try and limit the impact of the coronavirus on the country's bottom line. But how do you do that when there are also regulations around gatherings of people, around wearing a mask when you are in a public space? And these are all things, particularly, that face the restaurant industry.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think one of the challenges we've faced is that we really need proper communication on how to manage these things safely, what is safe, what isn't safe. So, we're getting the general messages of wear a mask, wash your hands, keep distance. But, ventilated areas are perfectly safe. So we see that outdoors, and I think the beaches and the parks apparently going to be open soon. Those spaces are fine as long as people aren't crowding together and, having social functions there. But to be outdoors, to sit at an outdoors restaurant should be perfectly fine. To have proper screening like we've seen overseas should be perfectly fine. But, we need to make sure that there's proper communication and an understanding of what's safe and what's not safe so that individuals are empowered, but also so that businesses can say to their customers, we have made our facility safe so that you can come and use our facility in a safe way. The reality is that COVID-19 is going to be around for many more months to come. So we need to get used to working in a different way, and we need to get used to, making sure that we're safe when we go out and be able to go out and know that we're doing in the safest possible way.
I mean, that statement in particular is such a scary one for those who have a vested interest in the restaurant industry in particular. I'm just thinking of the waiters who we know depend on tips to make their money, the business owners who perhaps have invested large sums of money into even opening new restaurants at the start of 2020. So in light of what you're saying, about COVID-19 being with us, we need to learn how to live with the virus in our everyday lives. How does that particular statement affect restaurants? Mostly, if we think about living with it every day, how do restaurants do that and keep their businesses afloat?
I think it's a huge challenge. The costs of compliance are significant. We've done surveys of industry, and the cost of compliance is significant. Firms are having to spend a large amount of money. Some have been transporting their own workers. Some of them are making sure that they don't have any cases within the factory, or it's quickly contained, because they don't want workers to get worried about coming into the office or coming into a factory or a workplace. So I think all of these things require an extra burden on the workers, and also, the ability to do so requires resources. And if you're already under stress because you haven't been operating for the last 4 months, it makes it more difficult for you to make those investments. I think we also see that restaurant workers, in particular waiters, are very vulnerable, because many of them would be operating on a casual basis, and they wouldn't be then eligible for the TERS, which has fortunately now been extended for another 6 weeks. But it means that those employees are at huge risk in their personal incomes. We're also likely to see new technologies emerging. So, people overseas, they're using apps to the menus on an app. You just walk into the restaurant, you link in, you order, you don't see a person. You have much less waitering staff, because people start using the technology, because they do get worried about the additional exposure to another person. So we are likely to see that trend also taking off in South Africa. We have seen it overseas.
Yeah. And as a consumer, would I then be, if I fall into that category of high-earning consumers who restaurants really depend on for their income, would I then pay more for a service that would be much cheaper had I been sitting in that restaurant?
It's difficult to tell, because restaurants are going to have to find the business model that works for them, given that they're going to be making less from alcohol. Even if they get the 2 drinks option agreed to, it means significantly less. People drink more when they go out. Yeah. So we've seen, in the UK, where they closed the bars, they left the off sales open. People drank less, because you're out, you have a good time socializing, you consume more. So what we will see then is the restaurants earning less, and they're going to have to adjust their business models. But they also don't want to chase away customers by making their food too expensive. So that they're going to have to find a balance that works for their customers and works for their bottom line. It is not an easy time for restaurants.
Yeah. I mean, you've called, and this is because of the numbers that we see around the country, restaurants in particular, known as super spreaders. Just some of the key findings for the 29th of June to the 12th of July, some of the numbers, if we look at the COVID-19 numbers in South Africa, for the week to July 11th, South Africa reporting more new cases per million people, more than the US and Brazil. So, Saul, as we round off our discussion, how do we continue with flattening the curve in terms of COVID-19 infections, and we balance that with economic recovery? I mean, that is a question that government is grappling with, and I don't see any easy answer to that.
There are no easy answers. I mean, we have opened up exceptionally quickly from under level 3. The taxis probably shouldn't be at 100% occupancy, because those are also risk areas. And the inconsistency, and I can understand the concern of the restaurant industry, where there's an inconsistency where taxis are allowed to operate at 100%, they're not. So those kind of things, I think the government is going to have to apply its mind to how do you bring in that consistency so that we do stop the contagion, because at this stage, we're likely to see, I mean, it grows exponentially. We're likely to see significantly more people being infected, and the old are very vulnerable. So that means we are going to see more people going into hospitals. And already we're hearing cases of people who are being turned away because there's no space in hospitals. So, the kind of situations are going to get worse unless we find a way of addressing it.
Yeah, and this is a discussion that we've been having over the weeks of the lockdown since the end of March. What the pandemic has done, it has shown up gaps in our economy. You talk about the taxis. We don't have a viable alternative that's able to transport most of our country, our hospitals not having enough beds. These are all the pre-existing challenges we had in South Africa.
Very much so, yeah. Also, I mean, we would like to see... Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, please continue. Finish your thought.
So we would like to see an option where people have, more, light motorcycles or other options of getting to the workplace safely so that they aren't exposed to the virus, and also, to get some agreement with the taxi industry to make sure that there's less risk for their consumers and commuters to get into their vehicles.
No, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Saul. Thanks for your time this morning on the AM Report. Saul Levin is Executive Director of Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. As we continue to track just the fallout from the economy, particularly today, our focus is on the restaurant industry. How do we balance out flattening the curve of infections and getting the economy going again? Such a difficult question.